Well, Michael, thank you for joining us for The Tea with Amanda Roley. So you can spill the tea on who you are. Happy to have you here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. So you are running for Washington's 5th Congressional District. Right out the gate, we want to know, why are you deciding to run in this race?
Well, it's a great question. You know, my wife and I, we have 5 little kids, and not just for our kids, but for everyone's children. We're just very concerned about the future of our country and don't want them to inherit a country with rising inflation and unsafe communities and hyper-partisanship. And we just want to give them their chance at the American dream, and everybody's kids a chance at the American dream. So that's why we're running, stepping forward to run.
So you want to build a future that your children can enjoy?
Yeah, you know, I just think that, you know, that's kind of the way the American has always been, is that the next generation leaves everything better for the future generations after them. And you know, that idea of having the chance to buy your own home or start your own business, get a great education. I just really feel like America's in trouble right now, both economically. The hyperpartisanship is a concern for us. You know, I have a track record of working in a very bipartisan fashion when I was in Olympia, and just kind of across the board, just very concerned. And you know, it's not every day you get an opportunity to run for Congress. We have, obviously, with Kathy McMorris Rogers leaving after her distinguished 20 years of service, you know, there's an opportunity to step forward and do this. And so, yeah, we decided to go for it.
That's great. Now, a really tough question for you, though. What type of tea did you decide to sip on?
Well, I am having a Bigelow green tea today, and I appreciate the fact we're having tea. My wife is from England. We met in Afghanistan, but we drink a lot of tea at the Baumgartner's house. And actually, I teased her when she became an American citizen. She got. We went through at the federal courthouse. She was very proud that day. We were both very proud when she became an American, and I teased her that maybe to celebrate afterwards, we should all go and throw tea into the Spokane River off the Monroe Street Bridge. And she thought maybe that my mother-in-law wouldn't appreciate that. But yeah, you know, down with the tyrant King George. We enjoy our tea here. And
I'm sure she brews an amazing cup of tea.
Yeah,
you're getting excellent service with the tea.
Yeah.
Well, great. So I want to give viewers a chance to get to know your background a little bit better and get a sense of who you are. I understand you grew up on the Palouse. You're a WSU econ grad. Tell me about how that upbringing really shaped who you are.
Yeah, I was the son of 2 educators. So my father was 40 years a professor of forestry at Washington State University, and kind of fun that Baumgartner literally means tree farmer in German, and I had an uncle.
So legacy Coug, right?
Yeah, Dad had taught there, and then my mother was 43 years a kindergarten teacher in Colton and Pullman, and so she was well known down there. So when I'm on the Palouse, I'm not Michael Baumgartner, I'm Mrs. B's son, but it's great to have a mother that's a kindergarten teacher. And you know, it was just an idyllic childhood growing up there in Colton and Pullman, and really proud to be from Eastern Washington, and loved being a Coug, and enjoyed my time a lot there. And then I ended up going to Harvard for my graduate degree. I used to make sure they were known as the WSU of the East, but in between, I spent a year with the Jesuits in Mozambique doing some volunteer work. So there was a Jesuit priest based here at Gonzaga named Father Mike Schulteis, a part of the Schulteis family, many people know. But he was doing some good work out in Mozambique, and I wanted to have a little adventure and do some service work bigger than myself, and so had a great year working there.
Wow. And what do your parents think of you running for a congressional seat?
You know, they enjoy it. You know, they go out in the parades, and you know, they're in their golden years now. So it's great when I hear about concerns about trying to protect Social Security and Medicare, because I have parents going through that same situation, or when folks are concerned about retirement living or health care in those old age. So that's good. But yeah, they're just very active in the community, and they like doing it.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then kind of looking at your experience in your career-wise, you're currently serving as Spokane County's treasurer and spent 8 years as a Washington State senator. Kind of talk to me about what is your proudest accomplishment over the years as an elected official?
Well, it's a real honor to be an elected official, and probably my favorite bill that we ever worked on was when we created the new WSU Medical School. So it was kind of a strange deal.
It's a big deal for the community.
It was, yeah. And there was a really dumb law from 100 years ago that we had to change. So 100 years ago, the legislators of Olympia gave the University of Washington a monopoly on medical education. They said only UW could teach doctors, and it really didn't make any sense. But the University of Washington really liked their monopoly and didn't want anyone else to have doctors. And we suffered from that in Eastern Washington because we just didn't have enough doctors over here. And so it was a bit of a fight in Olympia, but we worked in a bipartisan fashion, Republicans and Democrats coming together because it was the right thing to do. And the great thing about it is that once we got the medical school through, UW didn't want to give up on the Spokane market, so they teamed up with Gonzaga. So we went from having no medical schools to now having 2 medical schools, and we now have more doctors produced in Eastern Washington than they do in Seattle.
And how do we know that at this point? I know it's continually growing. Is that something reporting by the universities?
Yeah, if you look at both between the 2 schools, there are more graduates of medical education here in Spokane than there are out of Seattle. And boy, we need them because look at our rural areas. We don't have enough doctors. We have an aging population, and so expanding healthcare access would be one of my proudest accomplishments when we were in Olympia. And like everything else in politics, it's a team sport, and I was proud to be part of that team.
Yeah. And we covered the first graduating class of the the Elson S. Floyd Medical School. Seems like it wasn't too long ago, but man, they're really ramping up efforts there.
No, it was really great. I still remember meeting with Elson at Churchill's restaurant over
as one does when you're in Spokane.
Yeah, we went down to Churchill's, and over a steak dinner, he asked me to quarterback that medical school bill. That was in the fall of 2014. And what I learned shortly thereafter that Elson had colon cancer, and during that year it was so touching for me to be able to work with him because he was such a tremendous leader. And as he was dying from cancer, he was working so determinedly to get that medical school through, and that's just wonderful legacy that he has. And I still remember speaking to him right before he passed away. He called and was just so proud about what we had accomplished. And it's so wonderful that his name is on that building. He's just such a tremendous leader. I mean, there are 2 medical schools in Spokane because of Elson Floyd.
Yeah, great legacy for him. Yeah. Well, let you have a sip of
there
your
we
tea.
go.
It's not too hot. Let's see. So, talking more about your experience, I understand your campaign website says you've traveled 80 different countries. Wow. So you're a globetrotter. You've also served as a U.S. State Department officer at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Can you kind of talk to me about, with these international relations that you've been a part of, how will that benefit you if you're elected to Congress?
Yeah, great question. Some folks may not realize about how international and trade dependent Eastern Washington is. Of course, we are the #1 wheat producing area in the country for soft white wheat, and 90% of that soft white wheat grown here in Eastern Washington goes to the Pacific Rim. So that almost all of it goes down to the Snake River, down barges through those dams, down to the Portland area, and goes out to the Philippines or Japan. So access to trade is extremely important for us. Also, the largest employer in our area is Fairchild Air Force Base, extremely strategically significant to the U.S. defense posture. Given where Russia is located and China is located, having those refueling planes here in Spokane is extremely important for America. So that also is a very international aspect of what we deal with.
Yeah. Do you think you would be able to leverage some of those relationships you've built in the past as congressman?
I sure hope so. Actually, I spoke to a couple of the former ambassadors that I worked with today. I was very honored that one of them is Spokane's own Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who was my boss when I was in Baghdad. And Ambassador Crocker is America's most distinguished diplomat. And, I hope he'll be someone that, if I am fortunate enough to get elected, that would advise me in some ways and maybe help me with some committee assignments and understand things. But, it is, America can't be the world's policeman, but it is a dangerous world there. We have many international issues to deal with, and so we can't be isolationists either. We have to have a smarter foreign policy, and that'll be one of the things hopefully I'll work on when I'm in Congress.
What do you mean America can't be the world's policeman?
Well, we had, after 9/11, when we were facing up to the threat of radical Islamic terrorism under the Bush administration, we had this sense that by spreading democracy through the world, it would be a means to sap the energy out of radical Islamic terrorism. And so we, went into Iraq and Afghanistan and tried to build democracies there. And quite frankly, those countries weren't ready for it, and it wasn't necessarily in our strategic interest, and it cost a lot of American lives and a lot of American money. Obviously, the lives mattered a lot more. I'm not a military veteran, but I was privileged to see up close the bravery and valor of our veterans, and we owe them such a great debt, but we just can't be trying to build democracies in that sense. And so we have to be a little bit smarter and more reserved, but it is important that America be both respected and feared on the international stage, and so we'll be working towards those things.
Moving on here, I want to get you to spill the tea here, getting into piping hot tea territory. So what do you say to your opponent calling you a career politician?
Well, I'm not a career politician. I was in the private sector after I left Harvard and worked overseas. I actually left my private sector career to voluntarily go to Iraq. So that's okay. But one of the longest career politicians in Eastern Washington was Tom Foley, and he had a pretty good legacy.
He was a Democrat.
It was a Democrat, yeah. Kathy McMorris Rogers, if you want to give a moniker, was a career politician and served well. So, look, people say things in political campaigns. There's 4 weeks till the end of the election. There's a lot of stuff flying around. And I think people know me as my 14 years dedicated service here. And I think they look at things like the medical school and the North-South Freeway that I've worked on and feel confident in what they'll get.
Typically goes with the negative connotation, but you don't see yourself as a career politician, more average Mike?
I do. I did not feel like a career politician when I was doing volunteer work in Africa, or did not feel like a career politician when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan as a civilian. And but I appreciate our elected officials that step forward. It's not an easy process. We do want good people to run for office and have the expertise to do that. I've enjoyed being a county treasurer and enjoyed being a state senator, and hopefully the voters will give me an opportunity to enjoy being a member of Congress.
Yeah. So Michael, what is the number one thing you would want to address as a congressman?
Well, I think the top issue facing our country right now is securing the southern border. So I had the opportunity to visit the border a couple months ago, was down there with some Border Patrol agents. And before I went down, I talked to sheriffs and law enforcement all across Eastern Washington. And all of those sheriffs and law enforcement, every single one of them talked about the scourge of fentanyl that has entered our communities, how many lives it's costing, the families it's tearing apart, $1 a piece to get a fentanyl hit. And it's all coming over that unsecured border. What we saw when I was down there was we went out about 3 a.m. in the morning and watched drug cartels essentially move forward about 60 migrants. And right where the wall finished, they all walked around the wall and then declared themselves as refugees. And a lot of them are abusing essentially the goodness of America, and they're not technically refugees, they're economic migrants looking for a better way of life. But when they declare themselves as refugees, there's a process they enter where they have to be adjudicated or judged whether they deserve refugee status or not. And it's not working right now. And so previously, those claims would be adjudicated in Mexico before they came to America. Under international law, it's supposed to be adjudicated in the first safe country they go to, and it's determined whether they're actually a refugee. And I'm someone that's worked with war refugees when I was in Africa, and my wife and I both have worked to get some of our Afghan teammates that were under threat from the Taliban. My wife and I met in Afghanistan, but our Afghan teammates that were under threat from the Taliban into the country. So I'm familiar with the refugee process, but it's just being abused right now, and those too many drugs are coming across, so we do have to secure that border.
So you do support securing the southern border. Where do you stand as far as immigration policy if you were elected then?
Well, first and foremost, we have to be a sovereign nation, has to be in charge of its own borders and know who is in the country. I'm married to an immigrant. Obviously, every single American knows someone who's an immigrant and come to this country. So we just need to have legal ways for folks to come into this country and not this unfettered access that is going on right now. In addition to it's just not a humane situation. When I were there, the Border Patrol agents talked about how many children are being trafficked across the border and then aren't accounted for when they come into the U.S. And they also spoke about how easy it is from folks from terrorist hotbed countries or potentially from terrorists themselves to enter into that southern border. So unfortunately, I don't think it's a question of if, but when we will see a terrorist attack stemming from infiltration of the border. And it's just something that has to get fixed, and it has to get fixed now.
And so what is your number one takeaway then from your trip to the southern border, and how would you address it in office?
Yeah, so what we need to do is kind of three key things. One, we need to physically finish the border. So
Okay.
where I watch those folks walk around is where the wall stopped. So walls obviously can be, you can go under or over. Walls are not perfect, but they help. And that's what the Border Patrol agents told me. Secondly, we need to return to the policy of what's called remain in Mexico or other countries where before someone steps foot in the U.S., if they claim to be a refugee, that is determined before they get to the U.S. That was a previous policy that was stepped forward. And then here in the U.S., we need to implement something called E-Verify, which is a documentation to prove that you have legal status to work. And then once that is done, we do have industries that need additional migrant labor in some of healthcare, in some of the high-tech industries, in some of our agricultural spaces. But you can't fix any of that until you secure the border, because that's what needs to be done to give the American people the confidence that there's a serious look at the issue. And until that's done, you're just not going to have immigration fixed or reformed.
Yeah. And the Biden administration has recently been criticized by the Republican Party for lax immigration policy. I guess, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, probably the most frustrating thing I saw at the border was there was tens and tens of millions of dollars of good fence that was purchased by the Trump administration simply lying in the ground because the Biden administration, when they came into office, had promised not to install any of the Trump wall. Well, that's not Trump wall, that's American wall. That's what our taxpayers have paid for, and it's just petty politics to not install the rest of that wall if it's there. So they, instead of installing that good wall, they had been doing temporary wall or kind of like chicken wire. So that was disappointing to see, and so I think there does need to be a little more grown up and mature decision making on the issue and less politics.
Yeah. Finish the wall, yeah?
That would be one of the things as well too. That's not enough, but that's a piece of it.
Yeah. Let's see, I want to shift gears to economy, and feel free to have some tea there.
I'm enjoying it.
So looking at research, economy is one of the top important topics for voters this election cycle. You yourself have said inflation is out of control. So what is your plan to rein it in?
Yeah, so I studied development economics at Washington State University and also at Harvard, and taught a couple classes of economics as a teaching fellow at Harvard. So you certainly don't have to be somebody that does econ at Harvard to understand how expensive it is to live right now. All you have to do is go to the grocery store. You know, what my family, we have 5 kids. The difference of what we pay for a grocery bill now versus 4 years ago is just astounding. It's just super expensive, and you've seen that across the economy. You know, what happened during COVID is you had the worst of both worlds for inflation, which is you shut down the economy, so economic production and productivity, so there was a shortage of goods. And then in response, the government pumped out a ton of reckless spending. Not all of it was reckless, but a lot of it was reckless. And so with that—
What kind of reckless spending?
Well, if you look at any number of government programs where COVID money was lost, or essentially—
Like ARPA, or?
Some of that was, you know, and as the Treasurer's office, we've actually banked a lot of the money that has gone through these processes, and quite frankly, some of it just wasn't set up, and a lot of the infrastructure that was built, the money has been put out too quickly. So that is, if you don't have enough contractors or raw materials ready, it just shoots up the prices. So it's a supply and demand issue. And inflation is a function of too much money chasing too few goods. And under the Biden administration, because the COVID shutdown, we both had too few goods, and with what the Federal Reserve has done and the Biden administration has done with stimulus, it's also been too much money into the system. So it's been both. But you know, what you want is government spending that goes towards investment, things that create future productivity growth, you know, and less in the way of consumption. So
what kind of investment would you want to see that?
Well, look, we need to bring down the cost of infrastructure. So we need a lot more infrastructure in this country. And so one of the things—
Yeah, even right here in your
Oh, absolutely.
district.
You know, I mean, we need roads and bridges. One of the things that I'm proud about in the state Senate was finally procuring funding to fully finish the North-South Freeway. That process is ongoing. It's still taking too long, but the money is there. That I help put forward.
Getting there. Right?
Yeah. Well, you know, America used to be a country where you could build the Empire State Building in a year, or it used to be a country where the Hoover Dam could go in, or Grand Coulee Dam in a few years, because it was a country that was serious about building infrastructure. We had lower regulation, and we just got things done. done. We've become a country that is so cumbersome with regulation, with trial lawyers, with lawsuits, with environmental permits, that it's almost so impossible to build anything in a timely and cost-effective manner. You know, we see this in some of our schools' construction costs here. It costs about twice as much to build a school building in Washington State as it does in other states like Texas because of our labor and environmental rules. That's a state issue, but we need great schools, we need great roads, we need great bridges. We should have government doing things to bring the costs down on that infrastructure, not further increase them. And there are issues before Congress that would even further increase the cost of infrastructure. So we need to both bring those things down. And you know, it's not specifically infrastructure, but just on the same token, you know, your viewers should understand that a house in Washington State, of a new constructed house, about $150,000 of that cost of that house is because of just regulation and rules that Washington State puts on.
How do we know that? Is that based on
if you
law
talk to
at this
home
point?
builders or
Okay.
other things, if you talk to a home builder, the difference of what it costs them to build a house in Post Falls versus in Spokane, they'll tell you it's between $60,000 and $100,000 more expensive in Washington State simply because of the environmental permits or things that they put in, like in Washington State's attempt to ban natural gas, that increased the cost of housing. And so there are a lot of things that can be done to make houses more affordable, to make infrastructure more affordable, and we need it.
Well, on that note, I want to talk about housing. So there's a study found this year that nearly 1/3 or 31% of Gen Z are living with their parents because they can't afford to buy or rent a home. So what steps would you take in Congress to help these young adults who are struggling to leave the nest?
That's a great point. You know, I mean, when we talk about the American dream, I mean, I want my kids to be able to afford their own home. You know, my wife and I, we basically lucked out. You know, we bought our house in 2013 when the market was low, and we bought a house for about $300,000 that because of the limited housing supply, you know, that house has probably doubled in value or even more in the last few years. We're also, you know, we don't have a lot of money. We're pretty middle class, but we do have some investment savings. And because we own our own home and we have money in the stock market, like those Americans in that situation, we're weathering this economy a lot better. But if you're a renter that doesn't own your own home and you're somebody that doesn't have a lot of investment in the stock market, all these price inflations are just crushing you. So there's really two Americas when it comes to your financial situation right now. So for those homes, again, we need to make increase housing supply. So here in Washington State, we constrict housing supply where houses can be built. Planning is important, but you need to have that availability in that supply. And we also have these regulations that increase the cost, both on the environmental and on the labor rate. So we need to bring down those costs so that more housing can be built. It's also extremely important that we have access to raw materials and the goods that need to build houses. And so there's some inklings that there may be some high tariffs and trade wars, you know, on the horizon. We have concerns about that because that can increase costs and limit our ability there. So there's a number of things that Congress needs to do, but it's the basic laws of supply and demand. If you want things to come down in price, you need increased supply. So you need to do things that allow the supply to expand and not be so expensive.
It sounds like, you know, basic laws, but why is it taking so long to find a space where it becomes more affordable?
Well,
for
it's
young
very
adults?
frustrating to me. You know, when I was in the state Senate, on one hand, a lot of the folks that run Olympia, they say they want more housing, and then they do things that make housing so much more expensive, where they restrict folks can build. You know, we have a lot of open available land in Eastern Washington where you could build houses for lower cost. That's restricted because of things like the Growth Management Act. And again, things like when Olympia bans the ability to have natural gas hookups and makes people install heat pumps, that increases prices. One of the other things that Washington State does, every 3 years, the building codes are updated. Now that's good if you're an architect or a labor union because you have more need for your services, but they could go to less changing of just the raw laws and rules that would also bring down costs.
So cutting the red tape, essentially.
Exactly.
For building
That's
that
exactly.
supply.
I mean, there is zero reason that Washington State needs to be as expensive as it is as a place to live and work.
So moving on here, I got a couple more topics I want to run through with you. So let's see, it's a bit of a heavier topic, abortion. I understand you are pro-life, and a nationwide abortion ban has been brought up throughout the presidential election. Where do you stand on this? Would you support a nationwide abortion ban?
Yeah, so I don't plan on changing any abortion laws when I get to Congress. You know, when I read the Constitution, and I've sworn an oath to the Constitution in the past, it says clearly that issues that are not in the Constitution are reserved for the states. I don't think the founding fathers or the folks that wrote the Constitution were thinking all about abortion. So I think it's a state's issue. That's where it is now. And while I am a pro-life Catholic, I also realize that the people of this state have affirmed abortion rights before Roe versus Wade. So, the abortion issue is not an animating factor for why I'm trying to go to Congress. Obviously, it is a hot topic issue, and people talk a lot about it in the election. And I'm sure people will hear
it's very
more
important
about
to voters right
well,
now.
it is, and it also is it's a divisive issue. It's a wedge issue, and folks tend, in hit pieces and TV commercials and attack ads, folks like to play up that issue. But the reality is, if you just talk to the candidates, you can see where they are, and and I'm not going to Congress to change abortion laws.
So you would not support a nationwide abortion ban
Yes,
and leave it to the states to
exactly.
decide?
Yeah.
And then on that note, many Washington abortion clinics are right now scrambling to provide out-of-state patient care for those services. What do you think about this increased demand, and how would you address that increased need within those clinics?
Well, I don't
any needs within the clinics there.
Well, I mean, that would be up to the individual in the individual clinics. I'm somebody that wants good health care available for folks. I want folks to have that. Anyone that's a young mother or in challenging circumstances, I want to make sure that they're getting the support that they need, that things like crisis pregnancy centers and other availabilities for counseling are there. And if they need health care, they need to be able to access that health care. But I don't know exactly what would be the role of Congress in this as well, too, if these clinics want to treat these folks. It would just be under state law.
Yeah, if there's any sort of support that the clinics could receive on a federal level. I mean, I'm thinking resources, right? The time frame it takes to be available for an abortion appointment. It's about a week out. I don't know if there's any steps that you could take.
I don't
Congress.
see a role from the federal government. I think that would be a state issue as well, too.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, and then moving on. Let's see. So Congress passed a funding bill that avoided a government shutdown back in September, and the measure is expected to fund government operations at current levels through December. So considering how divided both chambers in Congress are, how would you plan to gain support from both sides of the aisle to pass a budget and prevent a government shutdown?
Yeah, it's just really frustrating that Congress continues to do these continuing spending resolutions, can't get full budgets passed, and obviously the deficit spending and the amount of money that's being spent is also extremely concerning. We're now at $35 trillion. $35 trillion in debt, and counting. My background in the state Senate was, at one point I was the vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee. So I have frequently participated in bipartisan budgets that balanced and didn't rely on tax increases. So hopefully we'll be able to do the same.
What worked for you in that
Well,
role?
the big advantage we had in the Washington State legislature is that we couldn't print money. So there was a set amount of money you could spend, and we didn't deficit spend. There is some deficit spending in the state on bonds and capital infrastructure. And then we also had we were a part-time legislature, so we had a clock that we had to hit, and then you couldn't print money, and we had mechanisms to force us to work together. The challenge of Congress, of course, is that with deficit spending, there's not a forcing mechanism. That would be wonderful if there was a balanced budget amendment, that there was actually a requirement to have balanced budgets. That would help the bipartisanship instead of these continuing spending resolutions. But we will be working hard to try to get budgets to balance.
Great. So you would work across the aisle. You have that experience.
Yeah, when it was unusual for Washington State. So I beat a Democrat when I first was elected, and then we took the majority as the Republicans in the Senate for 6 of the 8 years that I was in the Olympia. We actually had the majority in the Senate, but the Democrats always controlled the House. The Democrats controlled the governor's seat. So every bill I've ever passed has had Democratic and Republican support on it. And so,
what should that tell voters?
Well, that you can. I mean, I'm a conservative Eastern Washington guy, but I'm somebody that can work pragmatically and and look for wins. And look, in Congress, there's 435 members of Congress. You don't get things done in Congress because you make great speeches or you stand up and pound the table. It's how can you have to get to 218 votes, the majority of Congress, to get it out of the representatives, and then 51 votes in the Senate and a president to sign the bill if you want to turn an idea into a law. So I'll be working to triangulate and put together that coalition of 218 votes for the things that I want to get passed.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So kind of wrapping up here, I want to know, spill the tea again for me. Give me some piping hot tea, if you will. What makes you stand out against your opponent?
Well, I just think, I don't know about versus my opponent, but I just say that, I think I really fit Eastern Washington. Born in Pullman and grew up in Colton, spent some time in the Forest Service myself. I used to work for Hecla Mining Company for a little bit. So the issues of timber country up north and using our natural resources, my time overseas and working in American security during the Iraq surge as a civilian, I think issues of Fairchild are comfortable to me, and people know my record of accomplishments and bipartisanship and things like the WSU Medical School. So I think folks know what they're going to get from Michael Baumgartner, and I think that's why we did well in the primary and why I hope we're going to do well in the general election. And the other thing that I'm just very committed to is that even if folks don't vote for me and I am elected, I'll be the representative for the entire district, and I'm committed to trying to do a town hall every month. At least in my first year, I'd like to do is 12 counties in the 5th Congressional District. I'd like to do a town hall in every county, and we'll be as accessible as we can be because, it'll be the people of the 5th Congressional District that hopefully I'll be working for.
Yeah. And we do know your opponent is an Eastern Washington gal, so I guess, can you speak to, what makes you stand out against that? I know that's a honing point for you. This is your home, but when voters go to the booth, what's going to stand out to them?
Well, I think, there's just a little difference in experience in terms of accomplishment in one area. Almost everyone that goes to Congress from Washington State goes through the state legislature because that's Kathy McMorris Rogers did, Maria Cantwell did, Patty Murray did. You go down the list of folks that have represented us in Washington D.C. and I think 95% go because obviously it's a challenge to get to Olympia, and then once you do things in the legislature, you have the skill set about passing laws, and so I just think that it would be a very big jump to go.
You bring that experience.
Yeah,
to
that's the
table.
experience we have. But
yeah.
I think my opponent is a good person with some good, nice talents, and I applaud her for stepping forward and trying to run for office because our great republic is only kept if people want to participate in the process, and particularly people of good character that want to step forward. So I think we'll do well.
Kind of touch on this. If there's one thing that stands out to voters when they pick their candidate for the 5th Congressional District, what do you hope stands out to them you?
About me?
Yes.
Well, I guess if there's nothing else, I'll just say they ought to vote for the Coug. I'm very proud of Washington State University graduate and worked very closely there. As many people know, Mike Leach was a close friend of mine. We taught this insurgent warfare and football class together. And one of the things I do want to work on when I get to Washington, D.C. is making sure, I want to work on college sports reform and making sure that schools like Washington State, Eastern Washington University, Oregon State University, that they continue to have a place in college athletics and this professionalization of college sports that's going on.
It's a mess.
It is a mess. Yeah, we already have one NFL. We don't need two. And I've done some things on sports policy, and I think I have some good ideas that will bring some common sense and some balance to what's going on in the national NIL landscape. And so, yeah, we got to save college football.
Well, thank you so much, Michael Baumgartner, for joining me and spilling the tea on who you are and giving voters a chance to get to know you better.
Well, I appreciate it. It's hopefully we can come back and have some more tea in the future.
Always, yeah. Well, good luck on the race.
Thank you.